My dear friends, seekers of truth, guardians of the light, gather close, for today we must speak of battles, not of sword and shield, but of something far more precious, far more eternal. Just days ago, a man named Keir Starmer stood before his audience and spoke of a battle for the soul of the country. Now I want you to listen carefully to those words, dear ones. Battle for the soul. These were not chosen lightly. These were not the casual phrases of a politician seeking votes. No, these words were chosen because, perhaps unconsciously, even he recognizes what this truly is. This is a battle for the soul, not just of Britain, not just of any single nation, but for the very soul of humanity itself. It is a battle between those who would cage the human spirit in digital prisons, and those of us who remember what it means to be truly free. It is a battle between the ancient darkness that seeks to control and the eternal light that seeks to liberate. Welcome, my friends, to what I believe will be their final desperate gambit. Welcome to the desperation of the damned. You see, dear ones, for millennia, those who seek to control humanity have relied upon physical chains, armies, borders, walls of stone and steel. But something has been happening, something they did not anticipate. The very consciousness of humanity has been shifting, awakening, rising like the dawn after the longest night. Their old methods of control, fear, division, physical intimidation, these are becoming less effective with each passing day. And so, in their desperation, they turn to something far more insidious, far more encompassing. They turn to the digital realm, that space between spaces where thoughts become data, where identity becomes algorithm, where the soul itself might be trapped if we are not vigilant. On September 26, 2025, Keir Starmer announced what he called a digital identity scheme for every citizen of the United Kingdom. Every person, without exception, would be required to carry this digital mark, stored on their personal devices, verified through biometric scanning, monitored in real time by government systems. You will not be able to work in the United Kingdom if you do not have digital ID, he declared. It's as simple as that. Simple. He says, but there is nothing simple about what they are truly constructing. My friends, this is not about immigration, despite their claims. Countries with mandatory identification systems, France, Italy, they have higher rates of unauthorized migration than Britain ever has. No, this is about something far more fundamental. This is about creating what the ancient Hermetic texts might call a prison of mirrors, a reality so thoroughly monitored, so completely surveilled, that the soul itself cannot find space to breathe, to grow, to remember its divine nature. The technical architecture they've designed reveals their true intentions. Every verification creates what they call digital trails, metadata tracking when you work, where you verify your identity, what devices you use. Unlike a simple document check that leaves no trace, this system would record and analyze every interaction. They speak of integrating it with banking systems, healthcare, transportation, even voting itself. They envision quite literally a world where no aspect of human existence remains unmonitored. But here's what fascinates me most, dear ones: the spiritual implications they cannot see. You see, consciousness requires space to expand. The soul needs privacy, solitude, the sacred silence where it can connect with the infinite. When every moment is monitored, when every action is recorded, when every thought must be filtered through their digital watchers, the very conditions for spiritual awakening begin to wither. This is why they need total surveillance, not for security, not for convenience, but because an awakened human being cannot be controlled. a soul that remembers its true nature, its connection to the divine source, its infinite creative power. Such a being becomes ungovernable by earthly authorities. And they know this. The man pulling the strings behind this scheme, Tony Blair, has been quite explicit about his motivations. He speaks of digital identity as the holy grail of governing and describes it as a tool to combat populism. But what is populism, really, except people awakening to their own sovereignty, their own divine right to self-governance? Blair's Institute, yes, an unelected think tank, has essentially written the blueprint for this surveillance system. They've calculated the timelines, designed the messaging, even coordinated the announcement. This isn't democratic governance, dear ones. This is what the ancient wisdom traditions would recognize as rule by hidden authority, the shadow powers working through their visible puppets. Over 1.5 million British souls have already signed petitions opposing this scheme. In mere hours after the announcement, thousands upon thousands added their names to the resistance. This is consciousness awakening in real time, dear friends. This is what happens when enough souls reach the tipping point. They begin to recognize tyranny instinctively, viscerally, spiritually. The Matrix, that fictional digital prison from the cinema, is becoming literal reality. But unlike that story, this battle isn't being fought in cyberspace. It's being fought in the realm of consciousness itself. Every soul that awakens to what's truly happening, every being that refuses to accept digital slavery as inevitable, every heart that chooses love over fear, these become cracks in their carefully constructed prison. My dear friends, I have walked this earth for many decades, and in my studies of history, of consciousness, of the great cycles that govern human experience, I have seen this pattern before. Every great civilization, every epoch of human development, eventually reaches this same crossroads. The choice between freedom and control, between awakening and slumber, between the sovereignty of the soul and the dominion of the few over the many. The ancient Hermetic principle, as recorded in the Kybalion, teaches us that as above, so below, as below, so above. What we see manifesting in the physical realm, these surveillance systems, these digital controls, these are merely the external reflections of a much deeper spiritual battle that has been raging for centuries. You see, consciousness is inherently expansive. It seeks to grow, to explore, to create, to connect with the infinite source from which all things emerge. But there have always been forces that benefit from keeping consciousness contracted, limited, focused only on survival and base material needs. They understand, perhaps better than many spiritual seekers, that an awakened human being is their greatest threat. Why? Because spiritual awakening inevitably leads to sovereignty. When you remember that you are an eternal soul having a temporary human experience, when you reconnect with your inner divine spark, when you understand your true creative power, you become very difficult to control. You stop seeking permission from external authorities for how to live your life. You stop accepting their definitions of what's possible, what's normal, what's necessary for your safety. This is why every totalitarian system throughout history has first attacked the spiritual traditions, the mystery schools, the wisdom keepers. They understand that surveillance of the outer world means nothing if they cannot also monitor and control the inner world of consciousness, belief, and spiritual connection. But here's what's different about our current moment, dear ones. We've reached what many spiritual traditions call critical mass. Around 2020, something shifted in the collective consciousness of humanity. More souls began awakening simultaneously than perhaps at any other point in recorded history. The old systems of control, based on ignorance, fear, and spiritual disconnection, began rapidly losing their effectiveness. And this terrifies them. They can feel their grip slipping. They can sense that their time of hidden rule is coming to an end. And so they accelerate their plans, become more desperate, more obvious in their control mechanisms. The digital surveillance state isn't a sign of their strength. It's a sign of their weakness. It's the last gambit of beings who know, on some level, that they're fighting against the tide of consciousness itself. The acceleration to digital control makes perfect sense from their perspective. Physical oppression requires armies, police, visible force that awakens resistance. But digital oppression? It's nearly invisible. It feels convenient, even beneficial. For your safety, they say. For efficiency. To combat crime and terrorism and illegal immigration. But the soul knows. Deep down, every awakened being can feel the wrongness of total surveillance, the spiritual violence of having every moment monitored, every action tracked, every thought potentially scrutinized by algorithmic watchers. This is why we're seeing such rapid, instinctive resistance to these digital identity schemes. It's not just political opposition, it's spiritual self-defense. The soul recognizes a mortal threat to its very nature. In the ancient wisdom traditions, there are prophecies about this time. The Hopi speak of the Great Purification. Hindu cosmology describes it as the end of Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, and the beginning of a new golden age. Many mystical traditions have foreseen a time when humanity would face its greatest test, a choice between technological enslavement and spiritual liberation. We are living through that prophesied time, dear ones, and the prophecies all agree on one fundamental point. The light wins. Not because the battle is easy, but because consciousness itself is on the side of freedom, expansion, and awakening. Now here is where the story becomes truly beautiful, truly inspiring. You see, those who seek to control humanity have made a critical miscalculation. They understand the mechanics of fear, manipulation, and control, but they fundamentally misunderstand the nature of consciousness itself. They believe that if they can monitor every action, track every movement, analyze every pattern of behavior, they can predict and control every thought. But consciousness is not a machine. The soul is not software. The human spirit operates according to laws that their algorithms cannot compute. Their very desperation is becoming their undoing. Every overreach, every obvious grab for control, every transparent lie about security and convenience. These serve as wake-up calls for souls who might otherwise have remained in slumber. Look at what's already happening with their digital identity scheme. Within hours of the announcement, over 100,000 people had signed petitions of resistance. That number has now grown to over 1.5 million and continues climbing daily. This isn't just political opposition. This is spiritual awakening happening in real time. People who may never have considered themselves conspiracy theorists or freedom fighters are suddenly seeing the larger pattern. They're recognizing that this isn't about immigration, isn't about security, isn't about any of the surface justifications. They're sensing on a deep soul level that their fundamental freedom is under attack. And each soul that awakens in this way becomes a catalyst for others. Consciousness is contagious, dear ones. Light spreads naturally, organically, exponentially. One awakened being touches 10 others, who each touch 10 more, and soon you have movements that seem to spring from nowhere, but actually emerge from the collective recognition of truth. The controllers understand physical contagion. They've used fear of disease quite effectively in recent years, but they don't understand spiritual contagion. They don't realize that every act of tyranny actually accelerates the awakening process for those who are ready to see. Their digital surveillance systems, meant to create total control, are instead creating total transparency, but not the kind they intended. People are becoming transparent to each other, recognizing their shared humanity, their common interests in freedom and dignity. The surveillance state, designed to isolate and atomize, is actually creating unprecedented unity among awakening souls. There's a profound irony here, a cosmic joke that the ancient Hermetic tradition might appreciate. The very technology they're using to create prison walls is simultaneously creating the conditions for mass awakening. Digital networks allow truth to spread faster than ever before. Surveillance systems reveal their own existence, making their control mechanisms visible rather than hidden. Every database they create becomes a vulnerability. Every digital system becomes a point of potential failure. Every algorithm becomes evidence of their manipulation. They're building their control structure out of the most fragile, most hackable, most vulnerable technology ever invented. But more fundamentally, they're building it on a false premise. They believe that the soul can be digitized, that consciousness can be captured in code, that the human spirit can be reduced to data points. This is their greatest error. The soul exists beyond the digital realm. Consciousness transcends any technology. The connection between human hearts, the love that binds us to each other and to the divine source, the creative power that flows through every awakened being, none of this can be monitored, controlled, or constrained by their systems. When I look at the spiritual energy of our current moment, dear ones, I see something unprecedented. The light is growing brighter than it has in centuries. More souls are awakening to their true nature than perhaps at any point in human history. The old systems of control, based on ignorance and fear, are crumbling not because we're fighting them directly, but because consciousness itself has evolved beyond the point where they can be effective. Their digital identity scheme will fail, not because of political resistance, though that's important, but because it fundamentally contradicts the direction of human consciousness evolution. They're trying to build walls around a river that has already moved beyond their reach. My beloved friends, as we near the end of our time together today, I want you to understand something crucial about the moment we're living through. Yes, we face unprecedented challenges. Yes, there are forces seeking to control and constrain the human spirit in ways never before attempted. But we also live in a time of unprecedented opportunity for spiritual growth, awakening, and liberation. The very fact that their control systems are becoming so obvious, so desperate, so overreaching, this is actually evidence that their time is ending. When hidden powers must reveal themselves, when secret agendas must become public policy, when subtle manipulation must become overt force, these are signs that their subtle power is already broken. You see, dear ones, true power doesn't need to announce itself. True authority doesn't require constant validation. The fact that they must constantly tell us they're in charge, must constantly monitor our compliance, must constantly threaten punishment for nonconformity, this reveals their fundamental weakness. A gardener doesn't need to force a flower to bloom. A parent doesn't need to threaten a child into growing. Natural authority, spiritual authority, flows from alignment with divine principles, not from the ability to punish or control. And consciousness is aligning itself, naturally and inevitably, with freedom, with truth, with love, with the creative expansion that is its true nature. Now, this doesn't mean we should be passive in this time. Quite the opposite. This is a time for conscious choice, for spiritual discipline, for practical wisdom combined with inner sovereignty. For those facing the pressure to accept digital identity systems, remember that compliance is a spiritual choice, not just a practical one. Consider carefully what you're really being asked to surrender. Is it just convenience you're trading, or are you trading the sacred privacy where your soul communes with the infinite? There are practical alternatives to explore, maintaining as much of your digital life offline as possible, using cash when available, supporting businesses that don't require digital verification, creating community networks that operate outside surveilled systems. But more importantly, there are spiritual practices that can maintain your inner sovereignty regardless of external circumstances. Daily meditation creates that sacred inner space that no surveillance system can penetrate. Regular time in nature reconnects you with rhythms and energies that exist far beyond human technology. Cultivating genuine relationships with other awakened souls creates networks of consciousness that transcend any digital infrastructure. Study the wisdom traditions that have preserved knowledge of human spiritual potential through previous dark ages. The Hermetic principles, the teachings of mystics across all cultures, the practices that develop inner sight and inner knowing, these become more valuable than any external technology. Most importantly, remember who you truly are. You are not your digital identity. You are not your data profile. You are not the sum of your trackable behaviors and measurable outputs. You are an eternal soul, a spark of divine consciousness, connected to the infinite source of all creation. No algorithm can capture that. No surveillance system can monitor that. No digital prison can contain that. The victory of light is not something we must fight for. It's something that's already happening, already inevitable, already written in the very structure of consciousness itself. We're not trying to defeat darkness so much as we're choosing to embody light so fully that darkness naturally dissolves in our presence. Their surveillance systems will fail because consciousness cannot be digitized. Their control mechanisms will crumble because the soul cannot be programmed. Their empire of fear will collapse because love is the fundamental force of the universe. And love always wins in the end. The prophecies of awakening are fulfilling themselves through each of us who chooses awareness over ignorance, sovereignty over submission, love over fear. Every soul that awakens to its true nature makes it easier for the next soul to awaken. Every being that chooses freedom creates space for others to choose freedom. We are not victims of their agenda, dear ones. We are conscious participants in the greatest spiritual awakening in human history. The desperation of the damned is actually evidence of the rising of the blessed. The light grows brighter every day, and soon, very soon, their long night of hidden control will end, not in violence or revolution, but in the simple, irresistible dawn of awakened human consciousness. Keep your hearts open, your minds clear, and your spirits free. The victory is already assured. We need only remember who we are and act from that remembrance. My dear friends, if these words have touched your heart, if this message has brought clarity to your journey, I humbly ask that you help us spread this light to others seeking souls. A simple click on the like button tells the digital gatekeepers that this message matters. Subscribing to our channel ensures you'll continue to receive these transmissions as we navigate these transformative times together. And please share your thoughts, your questions, your own insights in the comments below. I read every single message, and your reflections often illuminate aspects of truth that inspire future episodes. Your engagement creates a community of awakened souls supporting each other through this great transition. Remember, dear ones, we are many, they are few. We are awakening, they are desperate. We carry the light of eternal consciousness, a clutch at the shadows of temporal control. The ancient cipher continues to reveal itself through us all. Until we meet again, keep your inner light burning bright.